my little primer thing. There we go. I can't, I'm just going to duplicate my display. This. I want to look at you while I talk to you.
Right.
That's what he said. Where's the stupid display thing too? Oh, it's and they also changed like everything in GNOME like every, I don't know, 6 months or something. Does this work? Yes. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Minimize that and change it back. All right. Hooray! Yeah, it looks horrible. Sorry. First I've prepared a few things like just pre-chiptune. Like sometimes you'll listen to songs and you'll hear chiptune influences that you think like, oh yeah, that's totally chiptune. Well, not really. And this is the not really section. So people probably know this song, maybe. Here, a little bit more, yeah. You know this shit? Oh, great, wonderful. So, listen to this synth. It's a perfect 50% square, which is like possible by every old game system. And case in point, I have a cover of this song on the NES, and here's me playing at MAGFest 9 or 8 or something. Sound familiar? Right, okay. Done with that. So, yes man, you're doing a great job. So who knows Take On Me? All right, good. So this bass at the beginning. Yeah, well, sort of. Not really. There's a reason. Can I get a little bit more volume on the DI? The bass in this is like super iconic, right? Like everyone knows that because it's the Yamaha DX7 bass on the keyboard. It's like the default patch. But what you don't realize is that, hey, listen to this. It's the same thing. Gems, which is something that people will use for Genesis stuff, and there's also SMSS, which is another Genesis development toolkit. You don't have to remember this, but all of these like let you, they'll let you port instruments from a Yamaha DX7 keyboard over to the Genesis, and this was like the era where Genesis composers, they would actually hire musicians. They'd be like, oh, well, you can just write something on your keyboard and plug it into this program and it'll hopefully kind of work, mostly. And it did kind of work, hopefully, mostly. So anyway, there's that. So then chiptune riffs invade popular music. This is one of my other cool, like, you know, whatever slides. This is Lazy Jones. It's an old Commodore, and I think it was on the Speccy and a few other things. So you're gonna recognize what's happening in about 5-10 seconds. Pretty shitty game. No, it's actually kind of fun. It's the ultimate mini game thing. Yep, and it's like that's like the original actually. And oh, everyone knows what it's from, right? You know, like that Zombie Nation song that has like the 4 on the floor. Yeah, all right. Damn it, that was up like last week when I. All right. So so who likes rap? Yeah. A couple people. That's good because no one else will get this. I don't really listen to a lot of rap or hip hop, but every once in a while I get into sort of a groove. But here's the thing, like Castlevania 3 intro does this thing right here. That invades this song. So really all I need to do is play Castlevania and lay some Lil Jon on it. It works. It's actually by a guy named Oh No Indeed. Don't you love the slide? Gonna smack him if he getting too drunk. It's perfect for MAGFest. But you hear it right away. More 50% square. So now we're like, chiptunes are a thing now. You know, like people are just using chiptunes in everything. And some guy named deadmau5, I'm sure no one's ever heard of him. Before he started, you know, releasing his current shit, he was doing like old FM PSG stuff like this. I'm like I'm just gonna skip through this one. You hear that, and you'll hear ARPs, their little blippy chord things, whatever. Skip forward again. There you go. The chords kind of jumping in there. Anyway, whatever. So now we're this. Yeah. So.
Wait, Nissan is sweet.
Yeah. Is he going from mice to cats? Playing a game of cat and mouse? Oh. All right, so I'm just gonna let this run because it already has text and I don't really have to talk, but Timbaland steals shit. That's basically the lesson of this story.
The worst.
And this happened like 5 years ago, but probably even longer. Oh, are you videoing? Oh. And they even say, here's the funny thing. Right there, yeah. I mean, the evidence is pretty damning. Yeah. So, so lots of people steal chips because they think they're cool, but then they use them in their own music. They'll be like, oh yeah, this is my retro throwback, and they like steal someone that's already doing retro throwback and put it in their music. And so like Timbaland is example one. Anyone listen to Crystal Castles?
Yeah.
Their first stuff is like complete ripoff, and they actually got in a lot of trouble for it. And then they like now their stuff is their own, I think. But like you know that was an interesting weird debacle, whatever. All right. Anyway, so that's like my sort of introduction, weird stuff that you might not have seen thing. And now we're going to go on to history. This is the one that I'm going to like kind of cruise through a little bit at a higher speed because I think most of you guys get a lot of the things that I'm going to say more than most of the places I get this panel. So let's do...
Just talk to me, Frank. Talk to everyone.
I'll talk to everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I want to get up and close and personal with you. I stole the interwebs. That's the title of this panel. Oh, come on. Give me a present button. God damn it.
No.
There we go. All right. I did it on the shitty graph paper background. It's perfect for chiptunes, right? Anyone draw sprite art on graph paper in math class or anything like that? Yeah, that's why I did the graph paper thing. Anyway, there's the real, yeah. All right. So, easy explanation of sound waves. Ready? When the sound wave is up, the speaker is out. When the sound wave is down, the speaker is in.
That's what she said.
That is, it totally is. But like that's it. Sound is AC. And chiptunes are powered by systems that are usually powered by DC. So there is a digital to analog converter that converts, ones and zeros, which is basically 1 is out, 0 is in, or some variant of that, and it just converts it into sound. And the ironic thing is if you ever want to remember how DACs and ADCs work in music, DAC, digital to analog converter, converts DC to AC, and ADC converts AC to DC, analog to digital. Think about it. And AC/DC is a band. So, all right. What a chiptune is, blah, blah, blah. This is like, everyone knows what a chiptune is. It sounds like Game Boy music. But Game Boys are not the beginning. Ta-da, here's some guy's Game Boy song, right? Yeah, there's music. What else do I have on here? C64 music. C64 is badass. It can do a lot more than... Doesn't it sound totally different from like most chiptunes you hear? The Commodore actually only has 3 channels. You can fake a 4th channel on the Commodore by playing with, they put a line in, here, I meant to turn that off. They put a line in on the chip. But you've never seen like a line in or a mic in on the Commodore because it doesn't have one. Bob Yanis, the guy that designed the chip, he didn't tell anyone. He just put it on there, and there's still a register so that you can tweak the value of the gain of the input level, or you can just wire a mic up to it, it works. But if you change the gain and nothing's hooked up to it, it's just grounded to the board so it just pops. Remember like when you turn on a stereo and it pops? If you do that like 300 times a second, you can get another sound channel. So people do that. And like you can get like speech and sampled drums and like all sorts of cool shit and whatever. Yeah, you can add 2 SIDs, and then you can have 6 channels or 8 depending on if you want to do the hack on both of them or whatever. Your Commodore gets kind of overloaded if you've got 2 SIDs and you want to do a lot though, because the Commodore 64 is not even 1 megahertz. It is 980 kilohertz is the CPU speed of the Commodore. Yeah, well you can overclock it or recrystal, or there's so much shit you can do. It goes blip blop, bleep bleep, 8-bit, old video game, new song, old game system, chips making tones, none of this shit matters. What a chiptune is not, MIDI. Here's a throwback, who knows what this is?
Yeah, turn it off. Turn it off.
All right. The entire purpose of this slide is just like a lot of people used to listen to MIDIs on like old sound blasters and shit in Windows and whatever. That sound chip is a chiptune chip, but everyone calls chiptunes MIDI specifically because you're listening to MIDI files on an old sound blaster. MIDI has nothing to do with chiptunes. Nothing. You can you can get things to control chiptune devices with MIDI, but like video game music of like the 80s, Mega Man was not written in MIDI, the Mario songs are not MIDI. What's up?
You could draw the comparison that MIDI is like a tracker format, just
right.
designed for industry music.
MIDI stands for musical interface description something, or like it basically MIDI is a language that instruments speak to other instruments, or sequencers speak to synthesizers or whatever. It does what MIDI carries, like on a MIDI keyboard. You turn on a MIDI keyboard, you set it to channel 0, and channel 0 you set an instrument. Instrument 0 in general MIDI is like a grand piano, and you can just go to fucking town on this keyboard. Pardon my language, but I mean it's nuts. You can just whatever the limitations of your hardware is what you can do. So like, channel 0 can support 127 note polyphony or whatever if you want, and it'll just do it. But MIDI doesn't have anything to do with that. MIDI is just sending notes back and forth, whereas most of the chips in like old Ataris and Nintendos and whatever are limited to like 3 or 4 sounds at a time, max. So when you want to do a chord, how many notes are in a chord? 3. And if you only got 3 channels, then that's how many notes you get at a time. If you want to play like bass, melody, harmony, any of that stuff, you're not going to be able to do it because you're already playing that chord. So you have to fake it and do tricks and whatever, and that's later in this panel. So Chiptunes are not MIDI, they're not your mom, they're not samples. Anything with samples lasting several seconds, I put that in there because you'll get a lot of sampled drums in old chiptunes, especially in like Mario 3 has the steel drums, Mario 2 has the bongos, Contra has that really badass like drum kit. It's really awesome. You know, stuff like that. It's not synthesizer wank. It's not anything that sounds retro. All right, so who went to the Chiptune show just now? 3 people, good for you. All right, no. Here's the thing, there's a huge great debate because in like 2000, Game Boy music became a thing. But chiptunes were around like way before then. People were writing, you know, like original music on, you know, like Commodores and Ataris and Nintendos and whatever in like 1986. It's just that no one was around then that had a Game Boy except for old people like me. So the thing is like you'll get into debates. Does anyone know Josh Sen Albatross? He ran this panel at MAGFest 8 or 9 or something like that. He's like, chiptunes are not video game music, and video game music is not chiptunes, and I'm totally making fun of him right now because isn't Mega Man, like the soundtrack to Mega Man is original music written on a Nintendo simply for the purpose of a video game, but that's the only, like, it's still a chiptune, it's still a song being replayed on a chip, and it's still coming out of that chip and whatever, and the chip is synthesizing that music. So to me, a chiptune is any music that is generated from a specific chip. And once you get to the point of samples, it's something different, and we'll talk about that later if we need to, or whatever. But yeah, anyway, here's like, you know, some people don't want their music to be categorized as a genre for chiptunes. There's like a big thing about that. Like, you're like, chiptunes isn't a genre. Like, I write chiptune rock. I write chiptune, you know, I mean, there is like, you can hear like rock attitudes in chiptunes, or you can hear like, you know, hip-hoppy sounds and chiptunes and whatever, and like, people forget they're like holding a Game Boy. Not everyone likes writing music for the same thing. This is art. People should shut up and write music. Yeah, all right, enough of that. So where did this all come from? It didn't come from like some guy inventing a software package for the Game Boy in, you know, like 2000. Games were dissonant and crappy, and E.T. is the worst game ever.
I own it.
Yep. No, it's not the worst game ever, but like, does everyone remember like Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., any Atari game with a theme song, how dissonant and junky it was and whatever? Right, so most old sound chips, not only are they limited on how many sounds you can make at a time, they're just limited on how many sounds you can make. You know, the Fairchild only gives you 3 tones, like low, medium, high. That's it. And like, that's it, they beep. People wanted jingles, and then jingles got up to like intro songs, like E.T. opens with the E.T. theme. Intro songs became sounds, like game soundtracks, and then, you know, like we wanted to get neater sounds, like we wanted to take it to the next level. We came up with weird ways to make our instruments sound cool, and we began to touch ourselves at night. So why would you do this now? Like, why is this a thing? So maybe you like, you know, weird old hardware. Maybe you want nostalgic gaming music. Maybe you like potentially strange limitations. Maybe you like the pure sounds of chips. Maybe you're a huge nerd. Maybe you need to produce really small files with like tons of music. Maybe you're masochistic. Okay, so like you've already heard there's like different kinds of people that do this. There's extreme purists that like only want to write on the hardware, hear it out of the hardware, all of that real. There's what a lot of people call fake bit, which is, you know, like mostly purist. You know, we want the real deal, we want it following the rules or whatever, but we call it what it is, and as long as you can't tell, it's all right. And then there's the naughty fake bitters, and I like to call these rip tunes instead of chip tunes. These are the kids on YouTube that are like, oh my god, Lady Gaga 8-bit remix. And it kind of sounds like chiptunes until you realize that it's actually a program that plays MIDI files that just does it with a sound font, and then you're like, no, that's stupid. And then there's chiptune bands. A good example would be like Anamanaguchi, or Danimal plays guitar along with his stuff. When he plays, D&D Sluggers. I mean, like a lot of chiptune people are trying to like it's kind of boring just watching someone play music on their laptop or their Game Boy or whatever, unless they're like really active on stage, which some people really are. And who is it that does like the bicycle kick on stage at 8 Static? He's like, I don't know, anyway, whatever. Point is everyone's trying to up the ante. Playing live instruments or singing along or whatever is a great way to do that. So I'll usually refer to that as like a chiptune band or, you know, whatever, unless it's a single man act. But like Anamanaguchi is, you know, like an entire band, and like the, you know, the NES is one of their instruments. So limitations, rules, whatever. This entire slide exists to tell you that like sound chips are little pieces of hardware that you just like throw instructions at, and the chip is the one that generates the music, not you. You're not sending a recording to the chip. Modern hardware, like, you know, a sound card, if you even know what a sound card is, because everything's integrated these days. You're just taking a recording, putting it in memory, and saying, hey, sound chip, here's a recording, play this. And it just, you know, uses the DAC and converts all of the bits and bytes and whatever to audio that you hear and sends it out of the speakers. And that's it. That's all sound is from like computers. Any modern game system, even like starting with like basically the PS2, every modern game system is, you know, doing the exact same thing and whatever. But so there's like a certain number of bits. Everyone calls chiptunes 8-bit. They're actually 4-bit most of the time. And you also have a bit depth for frequency, which varies. Like the Atari, the old Atari, it's 5. Atari computers, it's 8. The NES is 11. The Commodore is 16. So more bits or less bits leads to more or less notes in the frequency domain, and leads to more volume choices in the amplitude domain. Does that make sense? Did I lose anyone? All right. So you might not have special effects. You might not have all these other things, whatever. Has anyone ever looked at like a CD player where it says like 24-bit oversampling and stuff like that? CDs are only 16-bit sound. But what the CD player is trying to do is smooth out the wave and whatever. So like your chiptunes are 4-bit, even though they're on like a 16-bit CD and it might get smoothed out and whatever. And your question?
It's not a question, it's just the clarification, something you mentioned. You talked about the conversion like before the PS2, after the PS2 in terms of the sound hardware itself. I think the point to take away is that before like the PS1 and like the 90s and previously, typically the sound that you heard was being done on a chip dedicated to that had certain capabilities to reproduce sound based on something that's more like a piano roll than it is like instructions.
Or even worse.
Or even worse. And then beyond that, everything was done on the CPU. You had a sound library that either you played back CD audio or something that's pre-recorded, or you did all of that processing, but on the CPU, and then the sound card is just a chip that just plays the sound. It doesn't do anything. It's not. There's no limitations baked into the hardware anymore at that point.
Right. You're not limited by modern hardware. There's nothing to stop you from doing whatever the hell you want. Also, before someone asks me, because this comes up often, the Super Nintendo is where I stop the buck.
And that's unique because that was its own sound chip. That was like,
so the sound chip in the Super Nintendo is actually a CPU based on the 6502, which is the real CPU in most of the like early 8-bit systems, like the Atari and the Apple has one, Commodore has a derivative, etc. And it's a CPU that will calculate and mix all of the instruments' recordings at once. So the Super Nintendo is my stop the buck for like, you know, retro chiptune qualifies as, you know, like, oh, I listen to chiptunes, then you listen to something that is before the Super Nintendo, usually. Yeah, you might not have volume control like the Nintendo. You don't get volume control on the triangle wave. Special effects may not exist, space between frequencies, blah, blah, blah. Logarithmic versus linear. Like some of them, when you turn the volume all the way up, it is all the way up, but when you turn it down a notch, instead of it being a straight line of like, you know, whatever, it's like way down here. So like it's half the volume for just one notch. 1-bit music, Apple II, early ZX Spectrum, PC speaker, you know, the thing that beeps. That's all 1-bit, not 4-bit, just to give you an idea. Fine-grained tempo control is not practical because when you're drawing the graphics on the screen during a game or whatever, you can't update sound. So you have to do it when the gun in the back of a CRT, in theory, is returning to the top of the screen. That's your time to do sound updates or figure out if player 2 died or whatever. So you're down to like a list of maybe 5 or 10 practical beats per minute, the most popular of which is 150, if you're curious. And that period is called V-blank. All right, types of sound chips. This is where we're going to do our shout out. I promised a shout out for FM, but also there's PSG, and most of the people that are talking about chiptunes are talking about PSG. Oh yeah, and 90% of statistics are made up 69% of the time. Yeah, so anyway, this is the DC 8-bit, whatever, square waves, 3 or 4. This is everything I've been talking about, right? Examples of PSG chips. Sound generation is built into the CPU in the Nintendo and the Game Boy. So Nintendo went to a company named Ricoh that made copiers and cameras. Yeah, like if you've ever seen a Ricoh printer, that's this company. They went to them and they were like, yo, we heard that you have like a CPU engineering division. And they're like, yep. And they're like, okay, here's a 6502. We licensed it from these guys in Arizona. And can you like cram some CPU like sound stuff into this chip somehow? Here's the specification. And they just did it, and that's what the NES is. And then they did the same thing to a company called Sharp, that maybe you've heard of, that did the Game Boy CPU, but the core of the CPU is a Z80 instead with some features removed. And the Z80 was in like TI calculators and stuff, just to give you a heads up. And that's why they use it in the Game Boy, because they last forever on batteries. There's the AY3-8910, which is in like all of these things. Most of them you don't know what they are. But yeah. Yeah, I've got a tube, and actually we're making progress on the socket that we're going to put in it. So yeah, so here's a bunch of things that, you know, like there's some chips in, right? Sine waves. Here, let's pull up. I can actually show you what these things sound like, right? Load a thing. How about like, I don't even know, this one. All right. So square wave, you already heard what the square wave sounds like. There's the 50%. You can also change the duty cycle on that. I said duty. You can, and that's the amount of time that the power is on. Remember I said it's all zeros and ones, right? So that's because DC power can be on or off. So notice it's off half the time, on the other half, right? 25% duty means it's kind of a thinner sound, yeah. 12 and a half. There's also a triangle wave. Notice how smooth this thing is looking. Notice how smooth this triangle looks. Actually, the Nintendo, since it only outputs 4-bit sound, who is not familiar with the term anti-aliasing? Excellent. So what does anti-aliasing do?
It interpolates between edges to make it appear,
It smooths out an edge. So like usually you use this in graphics terms, like you're looking at the edge of a character and you want it to look smooth instead of jagged. This works in sound too. Like the NES cannot anti-alias its sound. So when you're hearing 4-bit sound, you can actually listen to the sound wave. This right here, oops, I'm just like totally, ooh, ah. This is an anti-aliased edge, but the sound wave itself, if you look at this, look at channel 3. See that edge? Also, you're hearing the edge. You hear the high-pitched whine? That is aliasing.
So a square wave is, if you actually listen to a square wave and your DAC doesn't smooth it out for you for whatever reason, it shouldn't. What you're actually hearing is
the edge of the wave.
You're hearing the bass frequency plus a whole bunch of odd harmonics that make up the square edge. And so that sound, that high-pitched sound is all of those really high harmonics that you're hearing. And it's a really cool sound. Triangle wave has the same harmonics, but they're in a much sharper fall-off pattern. But with the Nintendo, because it only has 4-bit ability to change that triangle, you're hearing the superposition of a whole bunch of square waves stacked on top of each other. So it's bass frequency with a fall off plus a bunch of other ones. So that timbre is really weird sounding, and that's what you're hearing there.
Aliased, it sounds like this. So the triangle wave really is much more mellow, but coming out of an NES, it sounds like that. Sine waves, actually most systems do not put out sine waves, but they're very popular in FM, but we're not to the FM part. White noise is, random bullshit. Everyone here knows, who here, actually let's do this. Who does not know what TV fuzz sounds like? Does anyone not hear TV fuzz? One? Yeah. So, it's all right. We're not going to make fun of you because you're young, all right? It's no big deal. But the thing is like, I'll do this at like anime cons, and like half of the audience knows what fuzz is, and the other half of the audience doesn't know what fuzz is, and it's kind of funny, but white noise. The funny thing about white noise is it's supposed to be random noise, but usually it's generated by like some sort of mathematical function built into the system. So that's why you'll get periodic sounds out of like, if you, Mega Man, Quick Man stage, that high-pitched like buzzing sound, that's actually off of the white noise channel. And it's just that they've changed the number that they're piping through that polynomial function to something that creates a weird harmonic. And stuff like that, so that's kind of fun. Do I have a sawtooth in this? I don't. Sawtooth sounds kind of like a saw. Spoilers. What do I hear? I'm sure I've got something awesome in here. I don't even know what I have. I don't know, I've just got tons of like, huh? I was just trying to like, I don't know. My directory structure is a mess. It doesn't matter, because you're going to get a bunch of them in a sec. But just to give you an idea, those are types of waves. There's what white noise looks like. Fuzztacular. FM. Let's move on to FM because I'm moving fast. I'm actually kind of running out of time, so I'm going to try and be faster. FM is generating sound using to math. Yeah, this is really great. It's good for natural tones. Like, have you ever, like in general music or like early music classes, they'll tell you about organs, and they'll be like, oh, organs and the pipes, and you're getting sine waves, and sometimes you get harmonics off of the organ and all of that, and like whatever. That's like a good kind of starting base for FM. Another really good starting base for FM is understanding a sine wave in general. Remember how I explained, like, when the speaker is out, the wave is high, and when the speaker is in, the wave is low. So what if you just consider that to be a value? When the wave is low, it's 0, and when the wave is high, it's 1, right? So if you apply that sound wave to specifically, for example, a volume value, like you say, hey, link the volume value of whatever's playing to this sine wave, and then you set the sine wave to a specific frequency, what do you get? You get it like turning the volume up and down either very slowly or very quickly, depending on what the frequency of the sine wave is. So you can do that, and you can also set pitch to link to, like when the wave is high, the pitch is really high, and when the wave is low, the pitch is really low, and that sort of a thing. So doing that is called an operator. One of those, and the wave itself is either a carrier wave, which is the original tone that you're playing, like C in the 5th octave or whatever, and then the modulation or the modulation operator is like I'm modulating volume by this operator or whatever. Does that make sense? Did I lose anyone? Cool. So you can do all these things. The more operators you get, the more complex of a sound you can produce. The very first FM was 2-operator, and then it went to 4 and 6. 4 is the most popular in like 90s FM game systems, and like the Genesis is 4-operator. If you know what an X68000 is, or like any of the like late 80s, early 90s arcade games that have FM, all of those are like 4-operator. But like the old Ad-Lib Sound Blaster stuff, before the Sound Blaster 16 was all 2-operator. The Sega Master System in Japan actually had FM, and that was 2-operator. Does anyone know what an MSX computer is? Nice. More people know what fuzz is, or don't know what fuzz is, rather. Sorry. So, all of those are FM, and all of those are 2-operator, and they sound kind of flat. The 4-operator stuff sounds a little bit more full. The DX7 keyboard is actually a 6-operator chip, that sort of thing. I just said all of those things. Oh, there's presets. So presets are like, you know, when you got a Casio keyboard, it was like harpsichord, vibraphone, E-piano, trumpet, like all those presets. Some of the chips actually have those presets in there, so that what you're doing when you're actually hitting the button is it's just being like instrument 5 to the chip, and then you get everything. All right, examples of FM chips. OPN, the 2203, that was in the PC98, or the 88 rather. OPN2, Genesis, and patch compatible with the DX7, which was a big deal. OPM, arcade machines, OPLL, Master System, OPL2, Ad-Lib Sound Blaster, there's the Sound Blaster 16. Who can tell me what they have all in common?
They all made by Yamaha.
Yamaha, because Yamaha owns FM, basically. Some guy at like the University of Tokyo and some guy at like CMU originally came up with FM, but then they like shopped it to Yamaha or whatever, and Yamaha patented it. Also, this is a really cool joke that maybe someone will get. I looked around for FM, like I wanted an illustration of what FM looks like, anyway. So here's some cool tricks. Remember I told you about duty cycle? Duty. So you can change the duty cycle on the Commodore while a note is playing and get really cool like wah-wah, like guitar pedal type effects and stuff like that. That's what that sounds like. It sounds sweet, yeah. So remember I was talking about chords. Computers are fast and stuff, so they can play chords faster than you can. And so here's a guy making a chord in the program that I was just showing you, except I'm not doing it, he is, because, I don't know, I already found this video on YouTube. But basically what you're gonna see is he creates a bunch of instruments, and then he creates a bunch of sound waves on his own that loop of the various different duty cycles. And then he lays down a whole bunch of notes with those different instruments and varies the volume a little bit, sets a tempo, and whatever. And so you're gonna see in a second after all of these are created, he's testing them out and everything. There you go. Ta-da. It's pretty easy to draw, you know, a sound wave or whatever. There you go. Sounds great. This is like real music for you, right? So he lays down a whole bunch of notes, right? Except you notice something? They're all pretty much the same note. But then you go over here in the effects column and you can use an arpeggio command. This is, in this tracker it's 0, which means play the root note. And you notice he puts down 3/7 and 4/7, which means goes up 3 semitones, goes up 7 semitones. Or goes up 4 semitones, goes up 7 semitones. And he's changing the instrument just to keep it real or whatever. Changing the volume, make it sound interesting. And then hits play. Well, you know, here's the tempo part. Ready? Everyone recognizes that, but not everyone knows it's just called an arpeggio. So that's what an arpeggio is. In real music terms, an arpeggio is just a term for a chord. And a trill is really what it would be called if you were like playing a piano, but people aren't as fast. Macros, so a good example, an arpeggio is a macro. You can also just like write your entire melody line for your song and store it in a variable, and you can be like, bend the pitches up or bend the pitches down. Like, you know, at the end of the song when you're like turning on the energy and whatever, and you want to jump up a key and, you know, play the entire song again, you know, just whatever. All of these can be macros, so you can like leave information out and apply a macro to things to change the instrument or that sort of thing. Your software or your development kit or whatever has to support it, but you can write these and kind of pray that your things will work. One really good example of a macro that I want to show off.
Macro.
Macro,
I was
macro.
gonna say it. I mean, is it Cambridge or Cambridge?
Either or either. So, if you play Gyrus, Ninja Turtles, Metal Gear, all of the snare drums in those, not in Contra, not in Ninja Turtles 2, not in the later titles, but in the early Konami titles, you hear this snare that sounds like this. That is actually all white noise, and they've applied a macro to it. All right, now I'm going to go back to saying macro. To it, and if you listen to this really slow, you'll hear what they do.
Sounds like an explosion a little bit.
More or less. So they're just, you know, going quieter, you know. So that's a good example of where you can use that. Because you don't want to remember frequencies, because a snare sounds like arced white noise, because you need to alternate tones, you need to alternate waves, you need to do blinks or echoes, or, yeah, I mean, there's tons of use. Yeah. You like my end instruction? Great. So, and how? All right, old style, how did we do this? Does everyone get this joke? I thought this would go over especially well at MAGFest, but some people do know what old style is. Okay, all right, good. So old style, you know, like, who knows what programmer art is? What is programmer art?
It's when you don't want to bother an artist, so you end up making up your own icon and it looks terrible.
Yes, exactly. It's drawing stick figures and putting them in a game that's supposed to be really awesome. So, you know, originally we just kind of wung it. That's awesome. It is now. So eventually programmers, you know, like got better at writing music, or they would put programmers with music experience in charge of music, and then eventually they put musicians in charge of stuff, because programmers were good enough to write tools for the musician guys. And then, you know, we began to fantasize. So new style, trackers, MML, which is like, actually there was just a conversation at Brental Floss's table about how he used to use his ringtone editor and enter notes by hand to do ringtones. If you ever did that, or if you ever wrote programs in BASIC where you're basically writing C4, which means like a quarter note with C, and then like E5, which is not actually a quarter note or anything, it's like something else, and you know, to change your octave, you had to be like O3 for octave 3 and that sort of thing. You store it in a variable and you pass it to a play command. That's what MML is. A lot of, yeah, okay. A lot of chip tuners will call this hard mode. But yeah, circuit bending doesn't really belong here, but I put it in there because I wanted to shout it out. Writing software that specifically like controls the registers, imitate it. Synchronize computers, add your original flair like chip hop or chip bands or derp. You know, like, all right. So revolution number one, because I don't have much time. First of all, a shout out to my panel tomorrow. I would love to see you there. It's called the Demo Scene. It is in this room at noon tomorrow. And the demo scene is really kind of where chiptunes got their start. Spinning cubes on like Ataris and shit. Because like an Atari doesn't have 3D hardware. It doesn't know how to do spinning cubes and like 3D objects and stuff like that, but people still did it. They wrote code to like make that happen. And so it's pretty fascinating. Like people would basically the way this would work is someone would crack a game and they would change the name of the people that wrote the game for real, like, you know, Atari or Konami or whatever, to like, you know, the Dude Bro or whatever, you know, his cracker name was. And then, you know, like, he was like, oh, well, I broke the protection on this game, so you can copy it now. I'm gonna do that. And then eventually they were like, oh, I've got a little extra room on the disc that the game came with, like 4K. I should just do like a cool thing that like plays a little ditty and like spins a cube on the screen, looks really cool, and at the bottom it's gonna scroll text about how I'm better than everyone else. It'd be like the rap call-outs of computer world. And so here's an example of what is called a crack-tro, which is exactly that. This does not have a spinning cube, but it does have a cool looking logo. Check that out. Ice Temple was cracked and trained by legend. No need for us to go to England to release wares, so back off. It's definitely like, it's seriously like the rap scene of computers. Anyway, the point is that like, this is what we would do, and then we got bored, right? So instead of writing crack-tros, we were just like, hey, we've got like this disc, and we could just do this on the disc and not have a game on it, right? And so then we have more rap call-outs, and people were like, I have an entire disc, I'm gonna do like a 5-minute music video that takes up only one disc. This is on a Commodore, if you couldn't figure that out. A slammer production called Tower Power. Kind of cool looking, could be in a game. A year has passed since our latest release, because you've been keeping up with all of these. So now it's showtime. The other name for my panel tomorrow is My Spinning Cube is Better Than Your Spinning Cube. Alright, so people actually compete with these still on modern hardware and everything. They just try to come up with cool stuff, and there's like various limitations. Like, it runs on a Commodore is a limitation, definitely. But like modern PC stuff, they'll try to write demos that are like this good and store them in 64K or like 4K or whatever, and I want to show you a whole bunch of them, and I'm going to do that tomorrow during my panel. And there's actually like cash prizes for people that do this stuff and whatever, it's crazy. So, introducing the tracker. Anyone seen one of these? Like, maybe over, oh, I closed Milky Tracker. No, I didn't. There we go. Hey, never seen one. So, it's like a 4-track recorder. Most of the trackers came out on the Amiga. They support samples. They output recordings, but there were also trackers that pipe notes out of PSGs and FM and whatever. So, these were 2 really popular trackers. This one's for the PC, this one's for the Amiga. And everyone latched onto this idea. And I mean, like, seriously, Atari ST, anyone ever seen that? I think that's either Renoise or like an early version, probably. Anyway, that's Mad Tracker. This is running on the MSX over here in the corner. Everyone did this. And then, who watches Conan? All right. Apologies. But kids think that the Game Boy was the first game system ever, and they're all indie hipster punk sceners. But this is my call out actually to Josh Scherzen Albatross, because Little Sound DJ and Nanoloop came out, and that it really did kick off like a completely new like revolution, so to speak, in chiptunes, and like people started, you know, now you could just take a Game Boy and write music on the corner of the street, or you know, like busk with, you know, like a little amp like I've got in the merch area, like you've probably seen the little red amplifier. You know, I mean, you can just hook up a Game Boy to that and like play a show. It's kind of crazy. So like, LSDJ deserves a lot of credit for like kind of bringing chiptunes back, for lack of a better way to put it. But at the same time, you know, like that's 2000, and like the demo that I just showed you a second ago was written in like 1992 or something like that. So like it definitely wasn't first. But like it also caused people to start writing more trackers and a lot of other things, and obviously generated input and like interest and whatever. I'm sitting here before you, so someone has to like this stuff, right? So I'm actually at -1 minutes, but I think I've got 5 or 10 minutes to answer some questions, and we can also kind of trickle into the hallway if we get kicked out of here. Guys, is there anything after this in here? Shrug. Ask me questions. Anything you want to know about a chiptune ever, here I am. What's
How
up?
would you classify an artist like Ronnie Prize? The guys who like, instead of the limitation being it has to play back on a certain hardware, the limitation is like, I need to create something, some kind of music that like the instructions fit in 4K.
I mean, that's still a chiptune. It's still being piped out of the chip.
No,
So-
like, it runs on a PC, so it's like a
Oh.
it's like a procedurally generated.
Oh, so like they wrote their own synthesizer code and that sort of a thing. That's an interesting. I would just call them demo sceners, because I mean they're probably writing the code too. So
Yeah.
you know they're very familiar with that.
So does the tracker, like, that program up there emulates the different chips and you run it off the computer, or are you actually programming a chip? Running it off a Game Boy?
Good question. It happens all of those ways, depending on whichever tracker you use. The tracker really just signifies that you're like typing notes into a spreadsheet and it has a play button. Like that's really what signifies what a tracker is. Like there are trackers that work only with samples, so you can just play back samples. And I mean, case in point, this tracker right here, I can just go down a little bit and be like, hey, you know, here's a thing, right? That's not a chiptune, but it is written in a tracker. It's tracker music. So you can write music. You can write, you know, like stuff in a tracker and use samples. There are trackers that exist that only run on sound chips or only run on original hardware. There are trackers like the way that I specifically write is I use either Milky or Soundtracker or whatever, and I've actually hacked little additions into the back end of Soundtracker to specifically get like nuances. Like some chips make a pop when they start a note, or you know, like they only repeat a note a certain way or whatever. I've figured all of that stuff out. I have like engineering documents for the chips and whatever, and I've added that into the back end of my trackers so that I don't have to like, I can take my tracker files and like compile them into an NSF and upload it to like a power pack and run it on a Nintendo and like all of that. But I gotta be honest, it's a pain in the ass. You know, and like if I can just make it sound almost exactly like that in my tracker without, you know, worrying about doing all of that, then why not just do it that way? So that's usually what I do.
Have you ever written for the SPC 700 for the?
I haven't yet, but I intend to, and I have some converters and stuff that I want to experiment with and whatever. There's XM to SPC, which is very popular among like SPC kids, I guess. I'd also like to just write my own code and play around with it
That'd
because.
be really cool.
but-
I'm like too scared
yeah.
to try it.
Well, my stepping stone is I don't know 6502 assembler, which is really integral to like getting involved in like writing games for the Nintendo and whatever. And the SPC is a 6502 with sound stuff. So what I want to do is learn to write NES games and then learn to write Super Nintendo code. And the Super Nintendo CPU, the 65816, is just the 16-bit big brother of the 6502. So that would probably also be very easy to learn. If you already know 6502. What's up?
Let's just pretend hypothetically that I only barely understood a word you said thus far, and yet I still want to try creating the first chiptune.
Okay.
What would be the first step?
Go get yourself a tracker. Any tracker, really. I teach people to use Milky Tracker at my panels, which is what you're looking at. And this looks confusing, but really it's not. I have a workshop where I teach people to do this in an hour. But get a tracker, either Milky Tracker for samples, or you can get Family Tracker, which on the upshot requires no instrument files, but on the downshot you do have to create the instrument inside of the tracker. As long as you're not daunted by that, writing the music is easy. I mean, you know, it's still laid out like a keyboard on your keyboard. So, you know, you're not, you know, like it's like having a MIDI keyboard. Some of them even support MIDI hardware, so if you can like play the piano or something and you have a MIDI keyboard, or you know someone with one, or you want to, you know, like blow $40 on eBay, you can just, you know, do that. But a tracker is like the ultimate way to go. All of the trackers have things that will like export WAV files, so that you don't have to do, you know, like any of the stupid compilation stuff or whatever. And it's really, I promise it's not hard. I have musical talent, but I have no live performance talent. And I did not take any music classes other than like 7th grade general music. I do not read sheet music. I can't even use a piano roll. So like, I know how to do this because I've just been playing around with it for so long. So you can do it too, I promise. Ask me something hard. Ask me something easy.
How do you change the tempo of the song?
In this tracker, you have a BPM right here. And you also have a speed right here. So at speed 6 or speed 3, the speeds per minute is accurate. Once you change away from a multiple of 3, it is no longer accurate. However, the speed is, remember how I told you you can only update the music when the gun is returning to the top of the screen on V blank, basically. So speed 6 means wait 6 V blanks before going to the next line. So that's what that is. So if I set speed to 9, is that going to make it faster or slower?
Slower.
Correct. Because you're waiting longer to go to the next line. So in a lot of old trackers, you actually don't have a beats per minute. This is like a tweak sort of thing that they added to later trackers to, you know, make it easier. This is not in a lot of old trackers, but you still have a speed thing. And I mean 6, well, let's just stick with it, right? This is 6. But here's the thing, I'm sample based, right? So like the samples are gonna play at the same speed. I'm gonna change it to 5. 4, 3, you know, or like 7, 8, 9, 10. Wow, 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 wow. Yeah, all right. You get it, right?
Yeah.
Cool. What else?
Why do you think they persist the compatibility for those speed and DPM commands back to when you were actually running it on like a Commodore 64, where you actually had to have that, you know, because the music you wrote in the tracker had to fit, you know, how you're going to play it back if it was part of the game or something.
They wanted newer programs to play older files, I think is the main reason, honestly.
Is there a mode that breaks that so that it doesn't do that anymore, or did they just keep it?
No, it's just kept. And most, even like FamiTracker came out maybe more than a couple years ago, but FamiTracker is relatively new. And that's still in there. Granted, you are writing NES music, so it's still valuable to know, but like, I mean, I think even in like Renoise, or, you know, like something really modern, I think it's still there. And it's just kind of, you know.
That's what people learn.
It's a legacy,
you want
yeah.
to keep it so you don't get to speak the same language.
Well, okay, so here's a good example. If you actually, if you hit my Tumblr, I know. I wrote this really, really long-ass, heartfelt article about trackers, and basically, trackers used to only be 4 channels. So you only get 4 at a time, right? And the Amiga has 4 hardware channels, so it just made sense to line up each channel of the tracker with 1 channel of the sound chip. But then we wanted to do more. We wanted, you know, to be able to play like 6 or 8 instruments at a time. And how the hell are we going to do that if we only have sound channels? Well, the answer is mixing. But if the chip can't do it itself, then mixing is very expensive. It takes a lot of CPU. And the Amiga is the same as the Sega Genesis, is the same as the very first Macintosh. They're all like 7, 8 megahertz tops. So mixing is even more expensive to do on those machines because most people are writing these songs to go into games or to go into demos, you're not just listening to music, you're writing the music so it can be used in something. So 8 channels is like a huge deal on an old computer. So there were 2 ways that they did it. One was they just mixed every 2 channels. They mixed channel 1 and 2 into channel 1, 3 and 4 into channel 2, 5 and 6 into channel 3, 7 and 8 into channel 4. And so they were doing a whole bunch of mixing at once. And there's this guy that wrote some really crappy. I thought that was Toki, our little chihuahua that tweets when she gets anxious. I wouldn't doubt it. All right. So this guy wrote this code that would basically combine 3 channels into one, and just mix that down to 1 channel, and then not do any mixing for the other channels, and that's a lot less expensive because you're only doing 1 mixing operation instead of 4. And if you play Turrican, okay, Turrican uses that to mix its music, and that was the first player to really like have speedy, not slow, like mixing code to do more than 4 channels on hardware that was only designed to do 4 channels. The tracker and player is called TFMX, and it's partially by Chris Hulsbeck, which is the guy that wrote the music too. And I shouted that out, but then I did an article, the entire purpose of this, I did an article on my Tumblr about like all the PC trackers that tried to change from 4 to 8 channels or more, or whatever, and there's like Screen Tracker, Fast Tracker, Impulse Tracker, Farandole, and there's one called Composer 669. And Composer 669 was a big deal because it was the first tracker to actually do 8 channels, period, on any PC hardware, ever. And look good, because all the other, like all the trackers were like text mode bullshit. And so Composer 669 had tempo, but it was based on like 88 beats per minute, or 86 or 82 or something like that, instead of 125 or 128 or like something that all of the other systems, they didn't let you tweak the beats per minute, but that's what they were based on. And it was because of all the vertical refresh things. The thing is the PC, you don't have any of that vertical refresh stuff going on in the sound. You have interrupts instead. So you just call an interrupt anytime you want to update something, and it happens in the background. So the PC didn't need to be based around this stuff, but no one like really latched on to Composer 669 because it was different. Like solely, like that was the sole reason that I stopped using Composer 669, is I was like, I'm so confused. Like my tempos, like I set the tempo to 3 and it's not fast. Like, and stuff like that. And I think that really actually hurt adoption a lot more than it should have.
So because it was trying to become a generic music creation tool for the PC, it sort of, but it was still a tracker, like it abandoned its roots and then no one adopted it.
Right, exactly. So, you had a little bit of that going on. So that's kind of the long answer to the question, but the reason I brought up the article and told a lot about that is because I'd like to encourage people to like look up the article, and there's a lot of really good info in there that I don't really want to repeat right now, or probably shouldn't. Yeah, it's kind of a long read, but there are a lot of cool screenshots, and I try to keep it interesting at least. Any other questions? You can ask me personal stuff. No, I think the Ask Brendan Anything panel will be at MAGFest 13. That'll probably be, that way you can just ask me anything. You can ask me about the flower incident at MAGFest 4. Or you can ask me about, so many good stories. You can ask me about why we wear wristbands at MAGFest. There was an alleged rape at MAGFest 5. I'm not telling you. Yeah.
Good night, everybody. It's good to see you.
That's why we wear wristbands. Case got thrown out of court. I hated spending all day in court, though. Yeah. Oh, you know what I'm gonna do? Da 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 da. Yeah, I could. Yeah, here. Let's all be happy. How we're gonna do this is this. So I did a cover album of the entirety of Pretty Hate Machine, pretty much all of you know this, but there's probably like 2 people that don't. So, but immediately after doing that, I wrote this. So I went from like hard industrial, like 9 Inch Nails music, and this is the first song I wrote out of the gate.
What do you call this one?
Ice cream truck. This is the Kirby part.
I was very
yeah.
confused when I came home to that.
All right, one thing I'm going to leave you with. I usually do this at the composing workshop, but you've been noticing when I play all of these, they just they go down all the time, and it just goes through the entire list and then starts over at the top again and plays another pattern and whatever. So this is something called Black Queen, which is designed to basically abuse the hell out of the tracker, and the idea is if you play this in the wrong replayer or with the wrong tracker or with whatever, it actually plays wrong because the tracker won't support an extended command or something that like this guy made use of, and it does actually in fact play wrong in Milky Tracker, but it plays mostly right. So I show it off as a good example. So you ready for this? My laptop will probably die during it, but it'd be worth it. Backwards. All over the place.
Is that the drum loop using as one of the samples?
No. I don't.
I think he is. He
Wait.
used to go faster.
Is he? Oh, here comes one of my favorite parts.
The visual effect is it's a tracker demo. I think it's more fun.
Yeah, it really is.
That part is actually playing on.
The visual for it is just brilliant. Oh yeah,
It sounds like something big.
Kind of.
it doesn't sound terrible.
Yeah, it does.
I think he says only play it in Noise Tracker 2 or something. No, he doesn't say. Wait.
Your computer will suspend very soon, alright?
Yeah.
Yeah, you worked it too hard, man.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the end. There's a lot of, if you want to look for tracker animation, that's something that you can search for on like, well, you can YouTube specifically for it and get stuff like,
Gaylord Junction.
yeah, Gaylord Junction is not as cool as Mothership. Mothership is way cooler. There's this guy named Strobe that does them. And he does stuff like this. This is where art meets tracking. So that's like another one of my favorites. Cell 2 is the other one that he did. These are all like a minute long because what they're doing to animate is creating a new pattern every time they need a new frame and whatever, and there's a limitation. You can only have a certain number of patterns in a track. So, $2010, not bad. This seems pretty mellow or tame or whatever, but then this happens.
Hey, it's Sean, everybody. What the? Alright.
Ta-da! The end. At the end of the song, it actually says, "I ran out of patterns."